Hello and welcome to CNBC TV 18. I'm Parikshit Luthra and here are the key global headlines we are tracking this evening. Twitter temporarily closes its offices to staff after a new wave of resignations hit the company. This comes after Elon Musk issued an ultimatum asking staff to commit to a hardcore work environment. Elon Musk keeps tweeting through all the drama, even posting memes mocking the expected demise of the platform. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi steps down from her leadership role after 15 years of leading the Democratic Party. Republican Representative Kevin McCarthy will lead the House as the next Speaker starting January. Once a close ally of Donald Trump, the New York Post trolls the former U.S. president days after he announced his presidential candidature. The outlet headlined the story, "Been there, done that." Last week, the Post's cover called the former president Trumpty Dumpty, who had a great fall. Rishi Sunak's new British government unveils a long-awaited fiscal policy, imposes a windfall tax on energy producers, lowers the threshold for the highest income tax bracket to bring more people under its ambit, removes tax offs for electric vehicles, also announcing sweeping spending cuts. 9 months into the war with Ukraine, Russian forces have been forced to abandon the only provincial capital they had managed to capture since the invasion began on November 9. Russia announced a withdrawal from Kherson, marking a potential turning point in the war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy celebrated victory and distributed medals to the soldiers and Ukrainian troops. With Ukraine strengthening its military capacity through support from the West, upgrading from land-based to air-based to heavy battle tanks, Russia is now facing a challenge to hold its occupied territories in Ukraine. What does the loss in Kherson mean for Russia? Let's go across to Anna Chernikova, reporter at the Voice of America, to discuss more. Anna, first of all, as Russia has withdrawn from Kherson, we're also getting reports of torture chambers. Could you elaborate for us as to what has been discovered there by Ukrainian forces?
Good day. Yes, sure. Well, for the moment, what we hear is that basically situation in Kherson and Kherson region is very similar to what Ukrainian forces and Ukrainian authorities and international society have already seen in the liberated areas of Kyiv region and Kharkiv region after those areas have been cleared by Ukrainian forces. And basically, situation is similar in terms of the findings of the chamber of tortures. We can put it this way. Also, reportedly, there are mass graves that should be investigated, and also we already know that there are bodies of military and also of the civilians that have been found, and of course investigation is ongoing. So basically the picture, the general picture is very similar to what the whole world and Ukrainian authorities have already seen in the recently liberated areas months ago. And for the moment, investigation is ongoing. We don't have particular details or particular numbers so far, but of course we're waiting for the official numbers, and we are waiting for the updates from there. For the moment, the city of Kherson itself and Kherson region is suffering of the lack of electricity, and all this stuff, but and all the supplies. But the city is coming back to life.
Okay, Anna, we're also learning about Russian airstrikes on gas and electricity infrastructure in Ukraine. Tell us how Russia has intensified or changed strategy after the withdrawal from Kherson.
I cannot say that they've changed, but they definitely continue their attacks. And the main target of these attacks is, as you correctly said, critical infrastructure, including energy infrastructure and gas infrastructure. So if we look at the yesterday attacks, those attacks were targeting mostly gas infrastructure. But if we look back at the November 15th attack, the most massive attack that was happening in terms of the amount of missiles that Russian forces used on Ukraine. This attack was definitely the continuation of those previous of the last months targeting energy, electricity infrastructure. For the moment, situation with energy in general is quite critical, especially electricity. So Ukraine, all regions of Ukraine suffer of shortages and outages. So for the moment, Ukraine has this planned, scheduled outages for electricity, and people have basically have a couple of hours without electricity and a couple of hours with electricity and so on and so forth. For the moment, I have outage myself, so we have basically the whole country is basically planning the life according to those. In terms of gas, situation is better for the moment. Of course, if we're not taking if we're not taking into consideration occupied and recently liberated areas, because recently liberated areas have a very big problem with both and also with water supply.
All right, Anna Chernikova, thank you very much for joining us here on Global Eye, giving us your view and a ground report of how things impact, and the dark background behind you, also reflecting what many Ukrainians are going through, power cuts and outages because of Russian airstrikes as well. Thank you very much, Anna Chernikova, for joining us. Now, to discuss the impact of sanctions on Russia. According to the Atlantic Council, if Western countries impose sanctions at the scale at which they did in 2022, we would reach more than 36,500 sanctions in the first quarter of 2023. These would be primarily impacting Russia. The report also says that sanctions have resulted in 70% reduction in semiconductor exports to Russia. So how will sanctions impact the global economy? Will price caps on Russian oil work? And how will export controls impact China? Joining me to discuss this Atlantic Council report are Charles Lichfield, Deputy Director at Geoeconomic Center, Atlantic Council. Also with me, Maya Nikoladze, Program Assistant at the Atlantic Council as well. Charles, if I can begin with you, are the sanctions really working on the Russian economy, hurting the Russian government? Give us a sense of the sectors which have been impacted according to your report.
Thanks for inviting us, Parikshit. Yes, the sanctions are impacting many sectors. The oft-quoted stat is the automobile sector, where production has fallen almost 70%. And this is simply because of their difficulty in buying technology from outside Russia. So the export controls are working very well. I think at the beginning of this crisis, at the beginning of the war, there was a sense that the financial sanctions might work faster and might even get President Putin to change his policy and pull his troops out of Ukraine. This was always an extremely naive view, and therefore the sanctions have been expected to achieve great things very quickly, which they can't. But that doesn't mean that they're not working.
Right. Maya, if I can ask you about how they will intensify. Of course, the intensity of sanctions will depend on how this war continues. But what is your sense on the kind of measures that we could see by Western nations?
The types of measures we could see by Western nations against Russia are mostly financial sanctions and export controls. We have already seen export controls being imposed by the United States. Now other countries are joining and intensifying as well. For example, the United Kingdom recently imposed export controls, which are sometimes called tech sanctions against Russia's key industries such as IT, engineering, and they intend to slow down these Russian key industries. So we are likely to see the escalation of export controls. And to explain what export controls are, they are measures designed by the Commerce Department to restrict the flow of technologies to Russia and in other contexts against other countries as well. But we will see more export controls. In terms of financial sanctions, as long as the war continues, we are likely to witness more sanctions against Russia. But Russia will also try to evade sanctions, and countries that are suspecting indirectly helping Russia's evasion exports will also likely to get sanctioned even more.
Right. Charles, coming back to you, we also see the Western nations, US, European Union proposing a price cap on Russian oil. This has been discussed with India. So there is lack of clarity whether there will be eventual consensus or not, how many countries will accept it. But how do you think this will impact the Russian economy? Will it bring down the price of Russian oil? How will Russia react?
I can say one or two things about what consensus is needed. Maya can take you through the detail of how the cap is meant to work. It does not need the entire world, except for Russia, to be agreeing with the price cap for it to work, at least in theory. The leverage that G7 countries and a few more are using are insurance markets and shipping markets, where they still have quite a lot of control. And as of December 5th, when the EU ban on seaborne Russian oil imports kicks in, they will allow other countries to use their shipping and insurance services as long as oil has been paid for at a certain price or below. It was the case that they were considering a sort of floating cap, but that is no longer the case. I think Maya can tell you a little bit about the mechanism and its history.
Right. I'd just like to follow up from there, Maya. If you'd like to add on the oil price cap issue, how it's going to work. Also, specifically to you, do the sanctions actually threaten the dollar and US payment systems?
Yes, so first on your oil price caps issue, Russian cargoes that sell oil above the specified capped price will be denied Western insurance and maritime services, but that also extends to the buyer companies of Russian oils. If they are purchasing Russian oil at a capped price, they can also keep Western insurance, but if they decide to pay more for Russian oil, then they will also lose access to Russian insurance. So foreign oil companies buying from Russia will have a choice: either pay the specified capped price and keep Western insurance, or pay above and be denied insurance. So these are not designed to, oil price caps are not designed to harm foreign oil companies, but rather they are designed to keep oil flowing out of Russia, but reducing oil revenues to Russia. Now, in terms of your second question about the dollar dominance, economic statecraft experts and experts have been observing the trends that dollar reserves worldwide have decreased in this year. However, we would caution against a rush interpretation, because what happened in 2022 was that the dollar appreciated by 6% against emerging market economies, and that made it their natural default move was to avoid weakening of their local currencies, which is why they have been unable to sort of obtain more US dollar. There are these trends. We will be monitoring them in 2023. But there is no reason to call for a dethroning of dollar or weakening of dollar as of yet.
Okay, we're running out of time. Charles, my final question would be on China. The US export controls on China, especially on semiconductors, how much are they likely to impact the US economy and the Chinese economy?
Again, you'll be in better hands with Maya's answer to your question.
Right. Maya, if you'd like to take that.
Thank you. So in terms of the effects of, first to talk about why recent export controls are so important. Recently, the US invoked the foreign direct product rule. And how is it different from regular export controls the US imposes is that it goes beyond the United States. It extends to foreign companies that use US origin software or hardware in their production process. And such companies exporting semiconductors to China will have to obtain a license before selling them to China. So it's extraterritorial, and that's why it's so significant. It's not targeting only specific entities in China. Now, in terms of the effect of on the US economy, Semiconductors, all types of semiconductors, are 9%, around 9% of total U.S. exports to China. But this foreign product direct rule is covering only highly advanced semiconductors, and those semiconductors are much smaller fraction of total U.S. chip exports. So the industry that is likely to get hit most is semiconductor manufacturing equipment, or SME producing industry. But overall chip exports won't be affected as much, and that's also the case for Taiwan. Around 60% of their chip exports go to China, but they said that only smaller fraction of that will be affected by export controls.
All right. Maya, we've run out of time, but thank you so much to you and Charles for joining us, summing up the impact of sanctions on Russia and the global economy. We're going to take a break, but up next, United States former presidential candidate Joe Walsh joins us to discuss the results of the US midterm election and Donald Trump's 2024 presidential announcement.